Welcome, weary traveler of thoughts, to a place where time drifts slowly, like sand through a quiet hourglass, and memory rests gently in the corners of a peaceful room. You have found your way to yet another installment of Boring History for Sleep, Forgotten Tales of the Lost City of Zerzura. Tonight, we begin a long and uneventful journey, a tale with no heroes and no climaxes, a story stretched across centuries, where things happen slowly, if they happen at all. You've come to the edge of memory, where history becomes uncertain and time begins to yawn. Tonight, we drift into the soft dunes of an ancient legend, one that never quite settles into fact, and never quite fades into fiction. This is the story of Zerzura, the lost city, or perhaps the dreamed city, resting somewhere beyond the last oasis, beneath centuries of shifting sand. Some say Zerzura was real, a place with white walls, palm groves, and quiet pools, hidden deep in the Libyan Desert. Others say it was only ever a story, a mirage born in the minds of traders too long in the sun. It appears in few texts, always on the margins, never in bold. A city whispered about in caravan tents, remembered briefly, then forgotten again like wind patterns erased overnight. Let's take a small detour to the year 1481. A book called Kitab al-Kanuz, or the Book of Hidden Treasures, was compiled in Arabic. Among its many strange entries, lists of buried relics, cursed items, and forgotten maps mentions a city called Zerzura, a white city, a city where birds guarded gates of brass, a city whose people, pale and quiet, spoke an unknown tongue and wore swords of strange silver. It did not say where the city was, just that it was beyond a place where no one had returned from. The passage was short, almost careless, and yet it stayed, passed from reader to reader, rewritten, translated, then left half-read. But it left just enough behind to be remembered, especially by those who enjoyed remembering things no one else did. Zerzura was always described the same way: white buildings, clear water, lush palms. It was not a city of gold or grandeur. It was a place of stillness, of cool shade, of calm. A place where those who were lost might finally feel found. Some believed it was guarded by jinn. Others thought angels. Some said the birds at the gate were not birds at all, but something older. The desert, as always, kept its secrets. The Sahara is not loud. It does not announce what it holds. What we know of it comes in fragments. A bone here, a pot there, a story passed down with names forgotten. The people who crossed it left few traces, and those who spoke of Zerzura never stayed long on the subject. It was, even then, something to be mentioned only briefly, and always in a lower voice. Let's pause here, beside a slow-burning fire in a desert camp. Imagine traders sharing dates and watered wine, speaking quietly after the stars have risen. One speaks of a place his uncle once heard of, beyond the dunes, past the Valley of Wells, a city with water and silence and gates that never opened. Another nods, he's heard it too. No one confirms, no one denies. The fire cracks, the conversation shifts. The name itself, Zerzura, is soft. It does not cut like Thebes or Carthage. It rolls gently, like the curve of sand over a forgotten road. In Arabic, some think it echoes the word for white. Others link it to birdsong, or dew, or something else entirely. The meaning is unclear, but the sound invites the tongue to repeat it, even if it leads nowhere. In later centuries, the story remained, not in history books, but in footnotes. Travelers, merchants, and map makers occasionally mentioned it, not in certainty, but as an aside. There is said to be a place, or according to an old guide, the accounts never agreed. One placed Zerzura west of the Nile, another to the far south. A third said it was in Libya, but didn't say where. Some say it mattered, others forgot entirely. By the 18th century, most scholars dismissed the tale, not with scorn, but with disinterest. They had other cities to think about, Alexandria, Timbuktu, real places, documented ruins. Zerzura, with its absence of evidence and its softly repeated name, drifted further from view. But it was not gone. It had simply become what it always was, a story, waiting patiently, just outside the margins. Let's take a moment to imagine the kind of person who might have remembered Zerzura. Not a general, not a king, perhaps a scribe, copying texts late into the night, perhaps a camel driver, hearing the tale once in youth and retelling it in old age, perhaps a child, listening at the edge of a tent while adults murmured names they didn't explain. Stories like this survive not through power, but through memory. There are no ruins, no confirmed remains, no inscriptions in stone, no list of rulers, and yet Zerzura remains one of the most enduring cities never found. Why? Perhaps because it promises little. It is not a city of riches or conquest. It is a city of water in the desert, of quiet shade, of stillness, of peace. In a land where heat burns and winds howl, the thought of such a place was reason enough to keep it alive. Let's take a final detour, not to the city itself, but to the space it left behind. Somewhere, on a forgotten parchment, a scribe paused before writing the name. Perhaps they had never heard it spoken aloud. Perhaps they'd only seen it in a corner of another scroll. But still, they wrote it, Zerzura, just once, just softly, a name with no explanation, a place that may never have existed, but also never quite disappeared. And so, we begin our journey not with facts, but with fog, with stories half heard and names written in the corners of maps. There are more parts to follow, of explorers who searched slowly, of guides who spoke vaguely, of stones that offered no answers. But for now, let us rest here, at the edge of the first whisper, where the legend begins to hum, gently, just beneath the surface of the sand. Let us walk a little farther now, not quickly, and not with purpose, but with curiosity. If Zerzura existed, then someone must have searched for it, and many did. Not all at once, and not very well. They brought with them maps, some copied, some guessed, some drawn in the dark, from memory. None of them matched, but they were studied, believed in, and followed often into nowhere. The Libyan Desert stretches vast and soft, without roads or rivers, without signposts or certainty. In this great emptiness, a line on a map was a hope more than a direction. Some drew Zerzura beside an oasis that no longer held water. Others placed it beyond a dune range they'd never crossed. A few simply wrote unexplored in the space where they wanted Zerzura to be. Let's take a small detour to the maps of the 13th and 14th centuries. Many of them were circular, the world arranged like a wheel, with Jerusalem at the center. Africa was there, but misshapen. The desert marked with vague sketches, camels, towers, strange birds. Somewhere in the west, a tiny dot labeled City of Birds, or Zerzura. No roads led to it, but the dot remained. Some maps were more ambitious. The Igrisi maps, drawn in the 1100s, were detailed but rotated southward, making orientation even more confusing. A traveler relying on these might have walked the right distance, in the wrong direction. And often, that's exactly what happened. Journeys ended not in discovery, but in circles. The desert has a way of shifting. Dunes move slowly, quietly. What was once a path becomes a hill. A landmark is swallowed, and the map, faithful to a moment that no longer exists, becomes useless. And yet, the travelers kept walking, some in search of Zerzura, others simply hoping that the next horizon might offer something different. Let's pause beside an old caravan trail, faint, disappearing. Here, camel drivers once led merchants across the sands, navigating by stars, by wind, by instinct. Some spoke of a white city, but only at night, and only after long silences. When asked where it was, they pointed forward, then shrugged. Somewhere, they said, always somewhere. In the 15th and 16th centuries, European mapmakers began to fill in Africa with greater confidence. Too much confidence, perhaps. They wrote down every rumor, mountains that didn't exist, rivers that flowed uphill, a desert lake, a hidden city. They wrote Zerzura near the edge of these maps, close to phrases like "here be lions" or "unknown tribes." The further the guess, the firmer the ink. Let's take another small detour to a letter written by a merchant in Cairo. Dated 1493, he claims to have spoken with a man who saw a white city in the west. It was guarded by birds, he wrote, and the people were pale. No name, no route, just that line. Scholars later doubted it, but the letter was copied anyway, then miscopied, and still, the story persisted. By the 1700s, interest in the Sahara grew not with urgency, but with a kind of scholarly boredom. Expeditions were proposed, then delayed. Maps were revised, then left unchanged. Zerzura, if it appeared at all, was a footnote, a curiosity. Not quite serious, but not yet dismissed. It hovered between the lines. Let's pause here and imagine a traveler named Gali. He is not famous. His journal was never published, but in a page marked only by a thumbprint, he describes a feeling. We came to a place where the wind changed. The sky seemed closer. I thought of Zerzura, though I do not know why. He does not elaborate. He does not return to the thought, but it lingers. Many travelers wrote things like that: stray thoughts, unconfirmed visions, quiet hopes. They spoke of distant white shapes on the horizon, of sudden cool breezes, of birds that circled without a sound. None of them said they found Zerzura, but many implied they might have seen something, just briefly, just before the sand closed in again. Let's take one more detour to a map made in 1804. A British cartographer, working from older Arabic sources, places a dot in the desert with no label. Later copies name it Zerzura with a question mark. Future maps remove the name, but leave the dot. The uncertainty remains, baked into the parchment. The roads to Zerzura never solidified. They wavered, shifted, conflicted. Some said the city was near Kufra, others said near Dekla, a few placed it beyond Gilthkeeper. The more maps were drawn, the less anyone knew, and the more the legend grew not in clarity but in shadow. Let's pause one last time, by a faded map in a Cairo archive. The paper is dry and cracked, the writing mostly illegible, but in the lower left corner, a scribble in red ink. City of quiet water perhaps, nothing more, no direction, no name, just a suggestion, a whisper in cartographic form. And so, the search continued not toward a destination, but around it. The roads were always long, the directions unclear, the maps contradictory, but the journey itself, the act of wandering toward a place that may never have been, was somehow enough. We will continue soon, with more names, more trails, and more almosts. But for now, let us sit with these maps, and trace the paths that do not lead anywhere, slowly, sleepily, as if direction was never the point. Let us wander now into the realm of voices. Not the written kind, but spoken ones passed between fires, echoed across tents, and shared in the hush that follows evening prayer. If maps gave Zerzura a vague shape, then it was the oral tales of the desert that gave it life. Not firm, not consistent, but present. A city remembered only when someone felt like remembering it. The Bedouin tribes who crossed the western desert told stories, not in official records, but in murmured recollections. They spoke of a city beyond the usual paths, a city of white walls and still water, of birds that nested above its gates, and people, quiet and pale, who never left. But when asked again, they might say they had never heard such a tale, or that the man who told it had been confused. Let's take a small detour to an old guide named Selim. He led many through the dunes, rarely with a map. He was asked once about Zerzura. He paused, then said only, "It is not for the living." The traveler wrote it down. Years later, Selim was asked again. He only smiled and said, "I don't recall." Perhaps both answers were true. Some say the Bakmaria lived in or near Zerzura, a name with no anchor. They were described as protectors, or perhaps exiles. Men of great beauty, women with veils of light silk. they spoke an unfamiliar dialect, or none at all. One story said, they guarded the gates. Another said they were the ones who built the city, then forgot how to return. Let's pause near a dried-up well. The rocks are scorched. Nothing grows nearby. A Bedouin elder once said this was the edge of Zerzura's land. When asked how he knew, he said the wind felt different here. But when the wind shifted, he shrugged and said, then perhaps I was wrong. Truth, in the desert, is not fixed. It moves with the dunes. The stories are rarely complete. One man saw a flash of white stone in the sun. Another heard a bell ring from an empty valley. A third claimed to have found a garden where the water was cold and sweet, but when he returned the next year, the garden was gone. Whether these tales were dreams, mistakes, or something else, no one was sure. Let's take another small detour, this time to a group of caravan guards resting under acacia shade. One of them, older than the rest, told a story about his uncle who had entered the White City. He was welcomed, given figs and water, and shown a library of books no one could read. He was told he could stay forever, but he left, or said he did. The others listened. Then someone changed the subject. Zerzura in these stories was not a destination, it was an interruption. Something mentioned, then moved past, a flicker in a long silence. Often it appeared in the same breath as other wonder cities beneath lakes, goats that vanished into sand, birds that spoke in riddles. It belonged to a world where facts were not required and consistency was suspicious. Let's pause beside a fire at night. The stars are bright, the air's still. A traveler hears the story of a man who followed a white falcon into a canyon. At the bottom he found a gate carved with strange letters. He knocked. The gate opened, but what he saw inside, he never said. When asked, he only shook his head. Some say that meant it was too beautiful to describe. Others say he simply couldn't remember. There are no clear descriptions of the people of Zerzura. Some say they were pale, others said dark-kind. Some claimed they spoke in ancient Coptic, others in no language at all. A few said they were silent altogether, moving through their city like wind through stone. Perhaps the point was not how they looked, but that they were not like us. Let's take one more detour to a village, where an old man carved stones with unknown symbols. When asked what they meant, he said they came to him in dreams. A scholar once visited, believing the symbols to be connected to Zerzura. The old man laughed. They're just shapes, he said. The scholar took notes anyway. The shapes were later compared to carvings found far to the west. No match was found. The Bakmaria were mentioned again in a 16th century manuscript found in Cairo. The writer, whose name has since been lost, claimed they lived between the dunes where compasses fail. He said they rode white camels, wore no shoes, and could find water in stone. No proof exists, but the image remains vague, wandering, and strangely comforting. Let's pause once more to listen to the wind over sand. Somewhere out there, voices once spoke of a city no one could reach. A city both close and far, real and unreal. A place known and unknowable. Not because it changed, but because the way people remembered it always did. The oral traditions are difficult to trace. They shift with the speaker. A tale told in one tent might end differently in the next. And yet the shape of Zerzura, the birds, the gates, the still water remained mostly the same. As if the story itself was traveling, just like the people who told it, always moving, never arriving. Let us rest here, in the echo of unrecorded names. We have not proven anything. We have not located a city, but perhaps that was never the point. The people who spoke of Zerzura were not trying to map it, they were trying to remember it, and that is a different kind of truth. Soon, we will walk alongside those who searched more formally, explorers with notebooks, supplies, and quiet determination. But for now, we remain with the storytellers, the ones who spoke softly, and sometimes not at all. Let us step now into more recent sands, not modern, but more documented. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the legend of Zerzura reached the hands of European explorers, men with notebooks, measuring tools, and an appetite for lost things. They did not shout. They wrote carefully, slowly, often with more dust on their pages than discoveries. But they searched just the same. Zerzura had already faded into myth by then. But myths, when printed, tend to feel more real. The explorers weren't chasing gold. They were chasing silence, the kind found in old manuscripts and vague directions. They followed camel tracks and sun-bleached hills, hoping to find a city that had already stopped waiting to be found. Let's take a small detour to 1835, when the English Egyptologist James Hamilton Ball recorded local stories of a white city west of the Nile. He gathered accounts from traders who pointed toward nothing in particular. They said, "They're beyond the mountains," but the mountains stretched endlessly. Ball wrote it all down, every guess, every shrug, then he moved on. In 1909, the desert traveler W.J. Harding King entered the Libyan Desert with camels and confidence. He was methodical. His journal lists supplies in careful detail: 9 water skins, 3 tins of dried meat, a rifle, and a copy of Herodotus. He searched for ruins, found rocks, searched again, found more rocks. He wrote, "The landscape is consistent in its refusal to speak." Then he drew a sketch of a hill that resembled a seated cat. Let's pause beside Harding King's notes. They are neat, underlined, precise. He writes of strange rock formations, of mirage-shaped illusions. One day he thought he saw a structure, a white square rising from the sand. When he reached it, it was gone, or never there, or simply light. He did not call it Zerzura, but he remembered it. In the 1920s, the Hungarian explorer Eliseel Elmasi arrived. His name would later be fictionalized in film, but in reality, he was slow, soft-spoken, and oddly meticulous. He was drawn to Zerzura not with urgency, but with fascination. He studied medieval Arabic texts, then plotted routes through the Gilf-Kipper Plateau. He brought a compass, an airplane, and too much paper. Elmasi's expeditions were marked by long, uneventful days. The wind blew, the engine sputtered. Occasionally, a rock carving was found, or a dried wadi or a cave. In 1933, he discovered the Wadi Tal and Wadi Abid, Al-Malik valleys thought to be candidates for Zerzura. They were beautiful, remote, quiet, but empty. He noted that the silence felt important. Let's take another detour to one of Elmasi's photographs. A single camel, standing beside a jagged cliff. In the corner, a figure sits with a map on his lap. The caption reads, "Camp before noon. Wind strong. No sign of passage." The photograph was labeled Zerzura, with a question mark. It remains unlabeled today. The explorers rarely returned with clear conclusions. Their journals are filled with possibilities, and parentheses. They saw things that might have been gates, caves that might have been rooms, bones that might have been human, but no dates, no buildings, no inscriptions that said, "You are here." Just the continued presence of maybe. Let's pause beside one final report, written by Ralph Bagnold, a British officer and desert explorer. He did not believe in Zerzura, but he respected those who searched for it. He wrote, "It is a city that, if it exists, does not wish to be found." He added that perhaps it had already been found many times, but never recognized. Or perhaps the search itself was the point. The failure to find Zerzura was never dramatic. No great setbacks, no ruined expeditions, just slow days, dry air, notes that trailed off mid-sentence. An entry from one unnamed traveler reads, "Followed caravan trail, lost sight of it, sat beneath acacia, thought about the birds at the gate, heard none, that was all." These gentle failures did not end the story. If anything, they preserved it. Each explorer, with each quiet attempt, added another layer to the legend. They mapped not the city itself, but the shape of its absence. And in doing so, they made it feel more real, not because it was found, but because it was searched for with such patient care. Let's pause here, where the wind begins to rise across the plateau. The sun is low, a journal lies open, half filled, a campfire flickers. The explorer writes nothing today. There is nothing new to say, but he still turns a page. Because maybe tomorrow, the city will appear. Or maybe it already has, just behind the silence. There is still more to say. The rocks, the symbols, the echoes of something older. But first, let us rest in this in-between place, where the search becomes the story, and where the failure to find anything becomes the closest thing to a discovery. Let us linger now in the places that almost spoke, in the caves, on the cliffs, and across the stones where someone, long ago, left markings, not writing, perhaps, not language, but something, scratched symbols, worn figures, incomplete scenes, found in places far from settlements, high above valleys, or deep within desert shadows. They did not shout, they only waited. Among the plateaus of Gilf, Khyber, and Yawner, explorers discovered carvings, spirals, dots, horned shapes, outlines of animals. Some showed humans with raised hands. Others showed boats with no rivers nearby. There were no dates, no signatures, no instructions, just lines, repeated, faded, persistent. Some believed they told stories. Others said they were just drawings. Let's take a small detour to the Cave of Swimmers, found by LSCL Almasi in 1933. Inside, figures float across the rock in curved, still poses, painted in red ochre. Their arms are spread wide. Some appear to glide, or drown, or dance. No one can agree. Almasi believed they were evidence of a wetter past, a time when the desert was sea. Others saw only mystery. A few believed the figures pointed towards Zerzura, that the images were left behind by its people before the city vanished, or was hidden, or fell into myth. They looked for patterns, for repetitions, a certain shape of a hill, a star, a bird. Most found nothing, some found everything, but nothing could be proven. Let's pause beside one of these figures, a bird, not drawn in great detail, just a few curved lines. Above it, a shape that might be a door, or a gate, or nothing at all. The lines were traced with chalk by modern hands, then photographed, then disputed. Some said it matched the stories. Others said the story was shaping the interpretation. In another cave, symbols were found etched into the ceiling. The sand had preserved them barely. The roof was fragile, the air dry. A team entered once, took notes, made rubbings. When they returned a year later, part of the ceiling had collapsed. The symbols unreadable. Whatever meaning they once held, now flattened into silence. Let's take another detour to an isolated rock face, marked with strange concentric circles. A desert priest in the 1950s said the circles matched the pattern of Zerzura's gardens, according to a dream he had. No documents supported this, but others came to see. They sat in the shade, drew the circles, then left offering small ones, coins, buttons, a cup filled with sand. The desert holds many inscriptions, not all mysterious. Caravan markers, trade records, names etched in haste. Ahmed was here, water, 2 days east. Do not trust the man with red shoes. These were easier to understand, but the older marks, the ones without letters, spoke less clearly. They asked questions, then gave no answer. Some archaeologists hoped that among these markings, a clue to Zerzura would emerge, a single name, a direction, a depiction of the White City. But what they found instead were layers of silence, erased meanings, art without annotation. Whatever was once known by the hands that made the markings had long since stopped explaining itself. Let's pause beside a journal entry from a French epigrapher who studied petroglyphs in the early 1900s. She wrote, "I see repetition, but no sequence. These are messages, perhaps, but only if one accepts that not all messages are meant to be received." She sketched an image of a figure with open palms, then stopped writing for 2 weeks. In the 1970s, satellite imagery was used to scan parts of the Sahara, faint outlines of structures, paths that seemed too regular to be natural. Most were dismissed as geological patterns, but one researcher noted that a certain curved shape, found in multiple places, echoed the arc of a gate described in the Kitab el-Kanuz. It was not followed up. The sand erases, but not quickly. It covers slowly, layer by layer. A carving today might last centuries, or be gone tomorrow. Wind decides, and the wind does not explain. The symbols, then, are part of that slowness. Part of a language no longer taught, or maybe never meant to be read at all. Just marked, then left. Let's take one last detour, to a flat stone beneath a cliff. Here, someone carved a spiral and a dot. Beside it, a human figure with no face. This was not discovered by an expedition, but by a local boy. He told no one for years. When a researcher finally visited, the boy could no longer remember which stone it had been. They searched. They found several spirals, but not the same one. The symbols of the desert remain, scratched into rock, etched into caves, painted with ochre, long dried. No one can say if they speak of Zerzura, but they do speak of presence, of time spent, of hands that moved with purpose. That, in itself, is something. Not a city, but a sign. There is still more to explore. Not maps or caves, but the thoughts behind the search. The desire to find something not just lost, but imagined. We will wander there soon. But for now, let us remain among these symbols, not trying to translate, only to notice. Let us drift now from the outer world into the inner one. After the caves, after the maps, after the shifting of sand and the fading of footpaths, something else begins to take shape. Not in stone, but in thought. A version of Zerzura that was no longer chased on camelback, but remembered, or perhaps imagined. A city that lived more in the mind than in the world. By the mid-20th century, the desert was being explored by aircraft and photograph, by scholarship and skepticism. Zerzura, though still mentioned in passing, had begun to fade into abstraction. Its features softened, its location blurred. The questions at once raised where, when, how gave way to quieter questions. Why imagine it at all? Let's take a small detour to the writings of Almasy. He returned from his expeditions with little to show, but his journals grew thicker. One entry reads, "The idea of Zerzura persists not because we have seen it, but because we have not. There is something in its absence that invites belief." He never claimed to find the city, but he could not stop returning to it, even in thought. The desert does this sometimes. It draws the line between reality and reverie so faintly that even those watching closely cannot say which side they stand on. Mirage is not deception. It is distance, heat, air, light bent gently, not cruelly. Some explorers reported cities that dissolved as they approached. Others claimed they saw palm trees, where none ever grew. Let's pause beside one such report. A French surveyor in 1926 described shimmering walls and a flicker of movement at the base of a cliff. He approached, found only sand. He wrote, "It was not disappointment I felt, but recognition. I had seen something I expected, even if it wasn't there." He told no one until years later. The concept of Zerzura began to change. It was still spoken of in books and whispered among enthusiasts, but it became less about a place and more about an idea. A city of stillness, a refuge, a resting point in a world that no longer paused. It became a metaphor for something felt, not proven. Let's take another detour into literature. Poets began to reference Zerzura as a symbol, a place unreachable, a name for a peace just out of reach. One wrote, "I will not find her. Zerzura is not meant to be found, only followed." Another imagined it as a place where no time passed, where days circled like falcons above a sleeping garden. Some said Zerzura was not in the desert, but in the longing, that to look for it was to reveal what one needed. Rest, clarity, stillness. Others said it was nothing more than the mind's attempt to explain emptiness, a shape, drawn to fill space, a gate imagined where only wind passed through. Let's pause in the mind of an unnamed traveler. He walks not with camels, but with memory. He remembers hearing the word as a boy. Zerzura. He does not know where it came from. A book. A tale told once in a half-sleeping room. He begins to dream of it regularly. Not clearly, just glimpses. A curve of white. A gate. A soft breeze. He does not speak of it. He does not write it down. But it stays. The human mind creates landscapes. Imagines places when none exist. Some believe Zerzura may be one such place, a collective mirage, shaped by need, by distance, by silence. A city for the tired, the uncertain, the watchers of the horizon who do not wish to arrive. Let's take one more detour to a psychologist's journal from the 1960s. He had interviewed desert wanderers, asking them about places they imagined but never found. One common theme emerged: a place of water, quiet, and birds. No name was consistent, but the shape was. He began to believe that such a place was part of human thought itself. He noted, perhaps Zerzura is older than language. In many ways, the longer Zerzura remained lost, the more clearly it was seen. Its features became stable, not from evidence, but from repetition. White buildings, quiet pools, a gate, sometimes locked, sometimes open, birds that circled, but never landed. A city remembered by people who had never seen it, and perhaps never meant to. Let's pause here, in the shadow of a thought. Zerzura no longer moves, it waits, not in sand, but in story, not in fact, but in form, and yet, its stillness is what keeps people walking. The maps in the mind lead toward it not in straight lines, but in drifting circles. We have not reached Zerzura, but then again, few ever claim to. Perhaps the search was always inward, a kind of slow remembering, a quiet wish given shape. And now, as we move on, we carry that shape with us not to define it, but simply to notice its presence. Soon, we will hear how this story survived, not through discovery, but through repetition. Through people, quoting someone else. But for now, let us remain here, with mirages, with memory, with the city that never faded, only retreated into the folds of thought. Let us follow now the path of paper, the slow trail left, not by travelers or shepherds, but by scribes and scholars. Zerzura, by this point, had faded from most maps, but it had begun to grow in another form, as quotation, as repetition, as a story told not from memory, but from reference. One writer citing another, one page folding into the margin of the next. By the 18th and 19th centuries, most references to Zerzura came from those who had read about it, not seen it. They quoted earlier travelers, often without names. It is said, an Arab once told, according to a source no longer available. These phrases fill the footnotes, each one a whisper of something already faint. Let's take a small detour to a dusty library in Cairo. Here a handwritten compilation of tales lies on a forgotten shelf. In the middle, a paragraph marked with a star. It reads, "In the west lies a city of white, hidden by the hand of the wind, where the birds do not sing but only guard." The source is not named. The next line is unrelated, but still, that sentence stays. Zerzura became a kind of echo, not spoken loudly, but repeated often enough to linger. Travelers told the tale to entertain guests. Explorers wrote about it to fill gaps in reports. Historians mentioned it to describe how belief can survive without proof, and yet none claimed it firsthand. It was always someone else who had seen, someone else who had heard. Let's pause beside a letter from 1854, written by a man named Thayer. He was stationed in Egypt, and wrote to his sister, "The locals speak of a white city beyond the dune fields. I asked twice. The second time, they denied the first." He did not pursue it, but he included it in his journal. It was later quoted in a regional history. The story traveled, even when he did not. Scholars, in time, began to reference one another. Aizo Arsene, paper cited, Almasi, who cited the Kitab al-Kanuz, which itself borrowed from oral accounts already centuries old. The story twisted slightly with each telling. A bird became a falcon. A gate became a door. A city became a suggestion. But through each version, the core remained. Let's take another detour to a German encyclopedia published in 1907. Under the entry Desert Cities, Lost Zerzura is listed third. The text reads, existence unconfirmed, associated with oases, jinn, and forgotten tribes. It offers no direction, no context, but it places the name in print. And print, once made, tends to last longer than memory. Some say Zerzura was never meant to be found, only remembered, not directly, but distantly. The way a smell reminds someone of a season, or a word stirs something they forgot they knew. A secondhand story does not weaken with age. It becomes something else entirely, a kind of quiet artifact of the act of retelling. Let's pause again, this time at a conference held in 1951, where the topic was Lost Cities of North Africa. A speaker presented on Zerzura. He cited 12 sources. Only 2 had visited the desert. The others had cited someone else. When asked what he believed, the speaker replied, "I believe the story matters, even if the city does not." The audience nodded, then changed topics. In a small travel book from 1972, a single paragraph reads, "We did not find Zerzura, but we found 3 stories of it, each told differently, each believed deeply. Perhaps the city is not in the desert, but in the speaking of it." The book was never widely read, but the phrase was underlined in one library copy. Someone noticed. Let's take one final detour into an article. Published in an obscure journal in 1984, the writer attempts to trace every mention of Zerzura across European sources. He charts the name's appearances, each one thinner than the last, each more unsure, but the name never quite disappears. It simply grows lighter, like a footprint smoothed by wind, but still faintly visible. The city, by now, had become a suggestion more than a location. Not something you find, but something you encounter briefly, in a sentence, in a memory, in the space between pages. It existed not in stone or water, but in language, in the quiet repetition of a name passed from one writer's hand to another. Let's pause, here at the edge of another page. The story still flows. The copies continue, some now digitized, others fading in old notebooks. Still, Zerzura persists, not loudly, but steadily. It survives not because it was confirmed, but because it was remembered, even if only as a line between other lines. Let us return once more to the desert, not to find something, but to keep searching. There is a certain kind of journey that doesn't expect results, a kind of walking that repeats not out of failure, but out of rhythm. The people who looked for Zerzura did not always look with hope. Often they looked with habit, because that's what they did. They searched, slowly, without promise. By the 1940s, most official expeditions had ended. Funding dwindled, reports grew thin, maps had been drawn and redrawn. Yet in quiet ways, the search continued. Independent travelers set off with smaller teams. 2 camels, a guide, a few notebooks. They camped near dried wells, followed the shape of the wind, waited for something to appear, though nothing did. Let's take a small detour to one such forgotten camp. Its name is not recorded, it does not appear in any journal, but someone lived there for 4 days. The ashes of a fire remain, a ring of stones, a spoon half buried. Perhaps it was a resting point, or perhaps it was the destination. Some places in the desert are not passed through, they are simply sat in. One traveler described a dust road that seemed to lead somewhere. It curved naturally, as if shaped by wheels, though no carts passed there. It led between low ridges, circled a rocky hill, and vanished. He followed it for a while, then stopped. There was nothing ahead, but he made a camp anyway, just to mark that someone had once been curious here. These quiet searchers did not leave much. A few notes, some photographs, often just coordinates, scrawled on the backs of maps already filled with previous trails. Camped near ridge. No water found. Strange wind at sunset. That was all. No conclusions, no claims, just traces. Thin and steady. Let's pause beside one such journal. It belonged to a woman named Ellen, who crossed part of the Libyan Desert alone in 1956. She never claimed to be looking for Zerzura, but she mentioned the name 3 times. Once in a dream, once in reference to a bird, and once beside an entry that simply read, "I think I'll keep walking west." She never said why. There were patterns. Travelers often returned to the same places not because they expected anything new, but because the places felt like points on a larger circle, a sort of map that wasn't about direction. They walked familiar trails, set up familiar tents, boiled tea the same way, and after a day or two, packed up and moved on. Let's take another detour, this time to a guide named Yusuf, who worked with different explorers for decades. He was asked once if he believed in Zerzura. He replied, "Belief is not my job, walking is." He never looked for cities, but he led others with quiet consistency, and he returned, again and again, to places where others said nothing existed. The camps grew fewer, but they did not stop. Some were made just for the sake of camping, for watching the moon rise, for listening to the silence. A few were made in places already known to be empty. The emptiness became part of the appeal, a confirmation that nothing had changed, that the desert still withheld what it always had. Let's pause in one of these camps. The sand is fine, the wind low, the fire small. A man writes in a notebook. He does not say what he's searching for, only that this is his 3rd visit to this particular valley. He makes no claim of discovery. He just says the quiet feels familiar here. That's all he needs. The culture of desert travel began to change. Roads appeared, radios crackled, but still, some returned to the old paths. They followed notes left by men who had long since died, not to finish what they started, but to feel, just for a while, what it was like to move so slowly, with no arrival, with no announcement. Let's take one more detour to a collection of photos in a cardboard box. They show stones, sand, a kettle on a low burner, each one dated, none of them captioned. A researcher later labeled them unverified expeditions, but the label missed the point. The photos were not evidence. They were moments. The search for Zerzura by this time had become something else entirely. It was not about the city. It was about the way people moved through the desert with a question in their pocket. A quiet question, not shouted, not printed in bold, just carried. Like a smooth stone, something to hold, to turn over in the hand. Even today, some travelers repeat these routes. They do not always say what they're looking for. Some bring books, others bring silence. A few still carry copies of the old maps creased, faded, marked with uncertain symbols. They say they just want to see for themselves, even if there's nothing left to see. Let us rest here, near one of those dust roads. It leads away from us. It does not hurry. It does not narrow. It does not reach a gate, but it continues. That, perhaps, is enough. The act of walking, the setting of camp, the boiling of water, the marking of a point on a map that no longer changes. Soon, we will broaden our view to cities like Zerzura and other deserts, imagined and whispered across cultures. But before that, let us sit a little longer in this camp, where nothing was found, but where everything, in its own quiet way, continued. Let us drift outward now, not away from Zerzura, but gently alongside it, across other deserts, into other myths. Zerzura is not alone. It has distant cousin cities, just as quiet, just as unproven, just as softly remembered. Some came from different continents, some from older texts, some from dreams, but all of them share something familiar. They were believed in even when no one found them. Some say Zerzura belonged to a pattern, a human habit, the need to imagine a city just beyond the map's edge. Not a city of power, but of peace. A place that promised shade, still water, and stillness. These places had many names, but their shape was nearly always the same, just far enough away to stay unfound, just vivid enough to feel real. Let's take a small detour to South America, where stories of El Dorado lingered through centuries. A city of gold, unreachable, deep in the jungle. It changed forms over time, from a man, to a place, to a whole kingdom. Expeditions failed. Rivers were crossed, mountains climbed. Nothing was found. Yet the story kept going. Not for the gold, perhaps, but for the journey it inspired. In the sands of Arabia, the city of Uber was whispered about in a similar way. Known as Atlantis of the Sands, it was said to have been swallowed by the desert after its people became arrogant. Some believed it was a warning. Others believed it could still be found. A collapsed sinkhole was later proposed as evidence, but the certainty remained loose. Let's pause beside a mountain path in Tibet. There, some speak of Shambhala, hidden kingdom, pure and untouched, nestled somewhere among the high passes. It does not appear on maps, and most say it never will, because Shambhala, like Zerzura, is not about arrival. It is about the longing to find a place where peace still lives. In West Africa, there were once rumors of a city called Ouagadougou, deep in the Sahel. It appeared briefly in oral stories, then faded. No drawings, no plans, just a name, spoken softly, almost reluctantly. Its meaning is uncertain, but those who repeated it often did so when resting in shade. A word not of conquest, but of calm. Let's take another detour to the pages of medieval Europe, where Prester John's kingdom was once believed to exist. A Christian land, rich and hidden, ruled by a wise king, waiting to be rediscovered. Letters were written in his name. Maps pointed vaguely east. Over time, the location moved from India to Africa to somewhere else entirely. The kingdom itself never appeared, but the belief outlasted the geography. All of these cities, Zerzura, El Dorado, Ubar, Shambhala, Ouagadougou, Prester John's realm, they share a certain texture. Not loud, not sharp, a soft blur between myth and memory. Each one shaped by its culture, but also by something deeper. The quiet need for refuge, a place beyond the known, untouched by time. Let's pause again, this time in the space between stories. None of these places were ever proved, but they were not forgotten, because remembering does not require proof. It only requires the willingness to retell. And so the cities lived on, not in walls, but in repetition. Some scholars believe these myths arose from the same root, a shared structure in the human mind. The desire to believe that somewhere untouched, a better place remains, not perfect, not powerful, just quiet, just safe, a place to walk toward, even if you never arrive. Let's take one final detour, to a traveler who knew none of these names. They did not study maps, they did not chase legends. They simply walked. One day, they stopped beneath a tree and whispered a name they had heard once. Maybe Zerzura, maybe not. They did not expect to find anything, but the speaking of the name was enough. In each of these stories, the pattern repeats. An imagined city, a long journey, no arrival. Yet the stories do not end. They circle, they pause, they soften, because the stories are not about finding. They are about remembering that people kept looking, even when there was no reward, no evidence, no applause, just a direction, a name. Now, we return to Zerzura, not with answers, but with understanding that it, too, is part of something larger, a thread running through quiet cultures, a shared shape that people across time have carried with them, just in case. Let us pause before our final chapter, not to conclude but to rest. We are almost at the edge of the trail. One more part remains, but first, stay here a little longer. Among names repeated in different tongues, each one searching for something soft, quiet, and just beyond reach. Let us return now to the desert, but not as explorers, not with maps or notes or measured steps. Let us return the way the story always intended, quietly, slowly, without expectation. By now, Zerzura is no longer a city to be found, but a rhythm to be remembered, something soft at the edges of thought, a name that continues even when the world moves on. There are no new clues, no final coordinates, no grand rediscovery. Zerzura remains where it always has, somewhere between imagination and sand. The white city with birds at its gate, the oasis that no one reaches twice, the story that forgets to end. That is how it survives, not in triumph, but in repetition. Let's take a small detour to the present. A child hears the word Zerzura for the first time. It means nothing to them, yet the sound settles. It is soft, like water, like dusk. They ask no questions, but they say the name again later, without knowing why. And the story, as always, begins once more. Even now, books still mention it. A sentence here, a footnote there, sometimes just a reference to an alleged city in the western desert. These mentions are rarely explained, but they remain. No one removes them. No one needs them to be proven. The name lingers, as if anchored by the weight of so many uncertain tellings. Let's pause beside a weathered stone somewhere in the Sahara. It holds no markings, but a traveler stops and wonders, was this near Zerzura? They'll never know, but for a moment the idea returns. That's all it takes. Not belief, not evidence. Just a single quiet moment of wondering whether something once stood here, even if no trace remains. Some say that all stories, told long enough, become places. Zerzura may never have existed, or it may have existed and disappeared before its name was ever written down. But that doesn't matter anymore. It has become a kind of stillness, a structure made not of stone, but of listening. Let's take another small detour, this time not to a map or manuscript, but to the space between them, the place where the details fade, and only the shape remains. That soft outline of white walls, a gate that never opens, birds that do not speak. These images, repeated often enough, become real in their own way, not as fact, but as presence. Perhaps that is what Zerzura always was, a presence, a pause, a breath in the midst of sand and silence. The idea that something peaceful, hidden, and unchanged might wait just beyond the last dune, not because it wants to be found, but because it is there for those who need to keep walking toward something. Let's pause again. Imagine a wind blowing gently across a forgotten trail. The sand moves slowly, covering old prints, shaping new ones. Somewhere beneath it all, a traveler once thought of a city with still water and quiet shade. They told someone, that someone told another, and now you are here, listening. The city was never announced, never described in full. It does not appear on monuments. It has no rulers, no ruins, no remains, but it has lasted longer than many cities built with stone, because it was carried not in walls, but in words. And words, once spoken slowly, are hard to erase. Let's take one last detour, a quiet one, to the space inside you, where some stories live without you realizing. Zerzura may be one of them now. You have heard it, thought it, followed it, and perhaps, in some soft way, you will carry it with you too. Not to share, not to search, just to know that something unseen can still feel familiar. The city that never stopped being looked for was never about finding. It was about the journey shaped by longing, about how people continue, even without proof, about how silence can be passed on as gently as any truth, and how belief, when allowed to wander, becomes something more than belief. We do not end with a discovery. There is no final gate, no clear answer, no revealing of truth. We end as the story always does, not with a conclusion, but with a turning away, a soft circling back into the dunes, the footsteps fading, the wind rising, the name repeating quietly in the distance. Let us leave Zerzura where it belongs, in the hush between stories, in the folds of thought, in the quiet spaces we return to when everything else is too loud. It has waited this long. It can wait a little longer. We'll continue again another night. For now, just rest. The past is in no hurry. Good night, dear dreamer.